Welcome to the second day of the 14th International ANAMED Annual Symposium. This is the fourth session this morning, and it is about organizations, conservation, and communities. I'd like to welcome our first speaker of the day, Caitlin O'Grady. She's trained as a conservator and conservation scientist, and she teaches at the University College London Institute of Archaeology's postgraduate conservation programs. She's a lecturer in conservation and affiliate tutor. She has extensive experience on working on archaeological projects in Albania, Belize, Guatemala, Peru, and Turkey. Currently, Caitlin directs conservation of artifacts and immovable heritage for the Kaymakçı Archaeological Project in Western Turkey. Her research interests include the disciplinary histories of conservation, conservation science, and their intersection with that of archaeology, as well as their preservation, analysis of ceramics, historic conservation materials, lime plaster wall paintings, and mud brick. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. Good morning. I wanted to thank the conference organizers for inviting me to speak to, and contribute to what's already been a really interesting first day of talks. Archaeology emerged as a scientific discipline with codified expertise and standardized methods in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. During this period, archaeologists recognized the significant damages incurred by their 17th and 18th century predecessors. Driven by fashionable collection manias, the acquisition and ownership of valuable and rare artifacts became political expressions of empire associated with affluent white Europeans. These market demands drove efforts to recover archaeological treasures quickly and with little regard for research-based methods, documentation, ethics, or systematic preservation. Those interested in excavating and preserving the past acknowledged and bemoaned the work of their predecessors. Sir William Matthew Flinders Petrie and others emphasized ethical approaches which necessitated that archaeologists engage with preservation needs. My paper will discuss results obtained from a survey of over 50 handbooks and topic-specific articles published by archaeologists and scientists between 1875 and 1955. Written for a number of audiences, including students and recent specialists, academic colleagues and rivals, and equally important, the public, they represent a desire to identify necessary preservation expertise required in the field and laboratory, as well as to provide instruction and educational resources. Regardless of audience, these publications were either devoted to preservation or included sections, chapters, or appendices on preservation. First aid during excavation was critical for the safe recovery of artifacts and their associated data. For Robert Heiser, who's right here, a well-known American archaeologist, these actions were categorized as preserving, repairing, and cleaning. This paper will investigate the identification and demarcation of specific knowledge, skills, and expertise as communicated by a variety of actors. These individuals, by existing at boundary interfaces between disciplines, facilitated knowledge production and the development of individual disciplinary identities through their exchanges and movements. The importance of terminology used to describe preservation actions is critical, as the standardization of language is a fundamental part of how experts distinguish themselves from others, including technicians and amateurs. The evolution of terminology over time reflects how disciplinary conflicts aim to identify distinct identities with their own attendant knowledge, skills, and expertise. Assessment of terms used in publications provides a sense of how archaeologists and others adopted them to describe preservation. The majority have their origin in crafts manufacturer trades, as well as the medical profession, and tend to be non-scientific terms. The Oxford English Dictionary defines the term mending as the action or process of repairing something decayed, broken, and it has its origins in both mending stonework and weaving. J.P. Droop, a British archaeologist who worked on classical sites, wrote in 1915 about preservation needs in the field, stating, "For the first date of finds, there should be a supply of plaster of Paris and paraffin wax, and of shellac and methylated spirit for the mending of anything that, like pottery, is not damaged by clean flame." The term preservative has origins associated with medicine and has been in use for multiple centuries, and the OED defines this as a substance that gives protection from disease or infection. Howard Carter and Arthur C. Mace used preservative to describe conservation materials and techniques in their 1926 publication on the tomb of Tutankhamun, describing artifacts as in a perishable condition and needing careful preservative treatment before they could be touched. Cement is another important term. In early usage referred to craft trades, in this case bricklayers. Robert C. Atkinson, a British archaeologist who was keeper at the Ashmolean Museum, used the term in reference to adhesives, stating, "The best cement to use is a subject of controversy, and many workers have their pet formulae." Come on. Okay. Language also conveys and codifies a hierarchy of actors and often reveals bias. Clarence C. Fisher, an American archaeologist who worked in Egypt and Palestine, describes his reliance on unnamed, for the most part, Egyptian workers to facilitate excavation and research. Recognizing the importance of preservation, he paid the travel costs of his trained Egyptian laborers to Palestine, including a native boy trained to this work of fitting and gluing, in this case, ceramics together. Colonial bias is clear in Fisher's statement, as is the implication that while preservation activities required specific skills, these were easily disseminated through supervised training. In the 1930s, George Reisner, an American archaeologist who standardized excavation methods in Egypt and elsewhere, also relied on the employment of Egyptian workers, stating, "For 10 years, we have had a skilled Egyptian workman fitting and mending the vessels under the supervision of staff, in this case, the staff of the Egyptian Museum." While Reisner's statement tones down elements of racial bias, it reveals that workers, especially local laborers, needed supervision by those with higher educational and socioeconomic backgrounds. From these brief examples, I hope it is clear how archaeologists rely on the use of specific yet non-technical terminology to signal and hierarchically organize the role and act of preservation. Disciplinary development during this period created new boundaries between existing fields of knowledge, skills, and expertise, as well as defending, advocating, and attacking existing boundaries between disciplines. Further, boundary objects or information such as notes, reports, handbooks, images, maps, films, etc., are used to define disciplines in different ways for various audiences. Carter and Mace highlight the proper organization of work and need for a number of different types of expertise when reporting on the excavation of Tutankhamun to academic and public audiences. When they describe work associated with their discovery, then came consideration of their preservation, their removal, and the description, the work of a chemist, of a man experienced in handling of antiquities, and finally of an archaeologist. From left to right, you can see Alfred Lucas, who's a chemist, engaged in preserving finds from the tomb. Sir C. Leonard Woolley, a British archaeologist, transferring a fragile object from the field in ore. And Dame Kathleen M. Kenyon, examining ceramic sherds in Jericho. Each individual has recognized skill, and in some cases, a single actor can play more than one role, as exemplified by Woolley and many other archaeologists and scientists. Statements made by archaeologists reveal this social process through creation of boundary objects in a number of settings. Petrie alludes to material knowledge paired with preservation expertise that is necessary in the field. He writes in a letter to his wife Hilda regarding the recovery of wall painting fragments that to preserve such a treasure was the question. After measuring and examining the condition and thickness of the plaster and searching for cracks and weak places, I determined how much I could safely remove in one piece. Woolley also writes in a private letter to his colleague regarding artifacts recovered at Ur in 1924. I am repairing things and putting them into condition without regard to their ultimate destination. The important thing from my point of view is to what in some cases can only be done by me or under my supervision for the repair and preservation of the things I've dug up. For Woolley, only the archaeologist has the authority and expertise to supervise and direct the conservation of recovered objects. Public realms of discourse also document attitudes regarding expertise and the preeminence of archaeologists over other excavation participants. This quote from a 1923 article in the Illustrated London News highlights the necessary expertise held by both Howard Carter and Arthur Callender while working with finds from Tutankhamun's tomb. They, quote, supervise each burden and lend a hand to carry the more valuable treasures themselves, end quote. While one of the image captions reads, too precious to be entrusted by any other hands. Each quote emphasizes the Western archaeologists, or engineers in the case of Callender, claim to authority over those of local or native workers. The importance, of preservation is highlighted in films documenting archaeological excavation from this period, which were developed specifically for public audiences to be shown at exhibits and talks. And as you can see, this film clip shows the repair of ceramics excavated from Tel Duir, or biblical Lachish, and was made between 1932 and 1937 by the Wellcome Marston excavation. In fact, we have Olive Starkey, who is repairing a ceramic object. She was the sister of the excavation director, James Leslie Starkey. This object is now on display in the British Museum. Okay. Finally, archaeologists make clear their familiarity with the published academic work of their colleagues by engaged in cited referencing. In this publication by Forrest E. Clements, an American archaeologist who excavated the Spiro Mound, the success of using standardized preservation methods and the author's ability to advance or improve previously published ones is celebrated. Clements writes, during the last 2 years, the anthropology department of the University of Oklahoma has consistently used this method in the field which is to block lift skeletal material, and found it very satisfactory. In this same article, he reports modifications to Teachman's solution for removing corrosion from copper. Clements unfortunately misspelled Douglas Leachman's name, who is a Canadian anthropologist who published widely on preservation and technological topics. So social construction of knowledge, skills, and expertise directly affects discipline development and the changing identity of associated actors through boundary work and the creation of these boundary objects. These processes maximize autonomy while communicating identity and expertise to a variety of participants and audiences. Handbooks also provide insight into how archaeologists considered preservation, organize work, and demarcate knowledge. As mentioned previously, Petrie highlighted the need for archaeological ethics. He states, "The excavator must be ready for all emergencies, for all classes of objects, and all stages of decay, and deal with each without delays, and often with scanty and unsuitable means at hand for their treatment." I think something that we can all appreciate if you work on an archaeological field project. Handbooks make recommendations about necessary tools that could bridge these gaps, including the bodkin and knife here. William Francis Grimes used to excavate fragile finds at Sutton Hoo in the 1940s, and field equipment recommended by Sir Robert Eric Mortimer Wheeler, who we'll discuss more later. Finally, it is possible to piece together unmentioned but necessary equipment that facilitated preservation interventions, including the need to apply molten materials to consolidate fragile finds. And in this case, practitioners used the Primus stove quite widely for this purpose. Elsewhere, it is possible to reconstruct the organization of labor. Fisher describes the optimum architectural division of labor in expedition dig houses. In 1929, he states that at Megiddo, the fourth or south side of the inner court is occupied by an open shed divided into alcoves with shelves and racks. Here, the pottery from the work is brought to be washed, sorted, and repaired before entering the registration rooms. Howard and Mace also addressed space needs and the separation of labor. They state, "We must have plenty of room. There should be boxes to unpack, notes and measurements to be taken, repairs to be carried out, experiments with preservative materials to be made, and obviously we should require considerable table accommodation as well as ordinary storage space." In both instances, one can see the spatial as well as temporal organization of labor, where artifacts move from one space and specialist to the next before they are examined either by an expert scientist or an expert archaeologist for final interpretation. Handbooks and more frequently single-topic publications publish research focused on developing methods of preserving problematic artifacts, including block lifting and mosaics, as well as other fragile materials. Tessa Verney Wheeler, writing about block lifting mosaics, published an article in 1933 on this topic. Unfortunately, she was obliged to publish under her married name, Mrs. R.E.M. Wheeler, and she's one of the very few archaeologists at this time publishing on preservation topics who is a woman. Elsewhere, Conrad Benson, an American archaeologist, describes methods for block lifting skeletal material and preparing them for exhibition, whilst Herbert Marion, a British archaeologist and conservator, contributed a number of technical studies on Sutton Hoo material. The convening of conferences of established experts sanctioned recommendations made in early archaeological handbooks, whilst influencing future publications. In response to recommendations made by the International Conference on Excavations held in Cairo in March 1937, the International Museums Office convened recognized experts to develop international standards for excavation, preservation, documentation, and training. The manual includes a chapter on preservation, which was edited by Harold G. Plunderleith, a keeper at the British Museum Research Laboratory, and it's the only chapter to include references in the entire document. And for this reason, it's because preservation was challenging and successful treatments were often dependent on specific situations. Thereby, both archaeologists and practitioners need to review and have access to literature. The bulk of references come from Museon, a publication of the International Institute of Intellectual Cooperation. But what is more interesting is looking at author distributions based on their disciplinary background. The vast majority are by scientists or chemists, followed by archaeologists. Very few are conservators. In fact, only 3 are included. Well, there's only 1 female author and 1 non-Western author from India. An underlying theme in all of the published handbooks and topic-specific papers is the importance of training and education. Conservation as a field was challenging. As stated in this manual I discussed previously, the conservation of excavated materials, a branch of practical archaeology, too often neglected in fieldwork, on the ground that it requires peculiar technical qualifications in the facilities of a chemical laboratory. One can see the scientific equipment on display at the British Museum and Metropolitan Museum of Art laboratories. These needs made training expensive due to the necessary infrastructure and space to facilitate work, an issue that continues to plague the field. Wheeler and Verney Wheeler recognized the need for standardized training in both archaeology and preservation in the late 1920s and early 30s, establishing the Institute of Archaeology to meet this deficit. The Institute, which opens its doors in 1937, provided theoretical and practical training in archaeology. As stated by inaugural director Wheeler, it is essential for students to have a grounding in other aspects of practical archaeology, such as photography and the drawing and treatment of objects, even if they are not going to specialize in them. For the Wheelers, this meant that conservation was a subdiscipline of archaeology, and one in which both archaeologists and those intending to specialize in conservation needed practical experience and training. As seen in the IOA conservation course enrollments, in some periods, certainly in the 50s and for some point in the 60s, the number of archaeologists and others engaged in preservation courses far exceeded the numbers of students specifically identified as studying conservation. Ione Getty and for a brief time Delia Parker provided training at the Institute from its inception. Both science and practical museum skills were crucial components of the proposed instruction and were included in Getty's unpublished notes. Following World War II, Getty formalized conservation training through a 1-year certificate course in the newly named Technical Laboratory, codifying this curriculum in her 1950 publication, The Museums Association. Through their teaching, Getty, Parker, and others contributed their knowledge and experience to both students and museum colleagues. And in collaboration with the Museums Association, they provided short, concentrated training programs to professionals already employed by museums, and also to meet that need for lack of training and preservation. These efforts to standardize training through formal curriculum was very critical for the evolution of conservation as that was soon to be recognized as a university discipline. The process by which disciplinary identities are formed is complex and incredibly important to understand. Further, this early boundary work and the production of boundary objects has and continues to have impact on the profession. Discipline formation and professionalization of archaeology specifically included preservation as an ethical imperative. Terminology provides insight into how archaeologists view the preservation process and the actors who engaged in it. And archaeologists and scientists both engaged in disciplinary boundary work to create distinct identities, as well as distinguish themselves from technicians, amateurs, and non-European participants. For the most part, these people are often missing from our records. Archaeologists continue to publish handbooks or manuals on conservation for themselves and lay audiences to reclaim preservation knowledge as part of the discipline. Implications of this boundary art continues to impact the conservation profession, resulting in constant calls to justify the value of preservation in the field and the costs associated with academic training, as well as the low salaries and often common view that conservators and their work is expensive and time-consuming. And I will leave you with the thought that, for most part, for conservators, that we really must do a better job of showing our work and ensuring that it is appreciated. Finally, this work is, I would like to thank my following colleagues, institutions, and of course the conference organizers. Thank you.
Işılay Gürsu. She is from the British Institute at Ankara, and she's got her PhD degree in Cultural Heritage Management from IMT Institute for Advanced Studies in Lucca, Italy in 2013. She joined the BIAA in January 2013. For the first 2 years of this appointment, she worked on the betterment of the presentation interpretation of the ancient sites of Aspendos and the ancient region of Pisidia. She is the co-investigator of the research titled Living Amid the Ruins, Archaeological Sites as Hubs of Sustainable Development in Southwest Turkey, awarded by the British Academy's Sustainable Development Programme in December 2016. She's currently part of the Safeguarding Archaeological Assets of Turkey, SARAT project, and she's going to talk about these projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I also would like to start by thanking the organizers, Christina and Nilgün, for inviting me here today. Being at ANAMED always feels like coming back home, so I would like to also extend my thanks to the wonderful staff at ANAMED for making this possible. And as Nilgün kindly introduced, I am working at the British Institute at Ankara from now on BIA to make things shorter. Tamam. I move a lot, so you can do something so that I keep still. It's going to be difficult. So in the keynote speech, Ebru mentioned about the theoretical framework of public archaeology, which I also would like to take as our theoretical framework at the BIA's Cultural Heritage Management projects. Because I am going to simplify the definition of public archaeology and put it simply as to understand the existing relationship between public and archaeology and to do something to improve that relationship. But today I'm going to present to you the results of some work that we have been doing in order to understand that relationship, because sometimes we build on projects that start without properly understanding that relationship and building activities, very good-willed activities. Because in the course of the projects, which I can show briefly as Living Amid the Ruins project, we also started off building activities without first properly understanding what the situation was. And then we took a step back and we said, okay, we had to start from somewhere else. We had to start by asking people what they want to see in their communities in terms of archaeology and how the safeguarding of archaeology could have happened with their involvement. So taking it on a maybe a little bit more ambitious level, I can say, and taking it on a wider scale, we put an element within our ongoing Safeguarding Archaeological Assets of Turkey, SARAT from now on, to make things again simpler. We identified one program within the project. Let me say a few words about the SARAT project and what kind of programs that we have been doing so far. SARAT is led by the British Institute at Ankara and is carried out with the partnership of ANAMED and ICOM UK. I think most of you know about SARAT because of its quite famous online certificate program, which is certified by Koç University and has been doing 4 terms of an online program on safeguarding and rescuing of archaeological assets. It was met with great interest, and we received almost 9,000 applications over these four terms, and many people got their certificates, and some people are still completing their certificate programs. But I will be mainly talking about one other program within SARAT project, which was actually the first thing that we did before we started off with the other activities, which was to undertake a public opinion poll in Turkey in order to understand what Turkish people think about archaeology. So with the first project that I have briefly shown you, Living Amid the Ruins project, it was smaller communities, and it was very much relevant to that particular region. With this initiative, we wanted to take maybe a bigger look and try to understand how the perceptions of the Turkish public is regarding archaeological assets. Because as experts, we of course always receive a lot of comments when we say what we do in life. You know, all those small talks at the hairdressers, at the taxi driving. You're an archaeologist, or you do something about cultural heritage. How can I find the treasure? There is this thing that I want to be, you know, can you tell me what this is? So, and after a while, because we keep hearing the same stories, we have a tendency to think that everybody thinks like this. Everybody is after the treasure. So we wanted to see what the reality is because we are also part of this community, right? And we wouldn't ask each other how to find it. So we wanted to have that bigger picture in our heads. So this was the first time that such a big survey, and I'm going to refer to this as the survey from now on, so a big survey was undertaken in Turkey. It was, of course, in order to do such a big field work, in Sarat we are 5 people. It's impossible to do it ourselves. We needed a professional company to go and investigate this ideas of people. And we teamed with Konda, a company which has a lot of experience both in fieldwork and social research in Turkey. It was conducted in May 2018, so like 1.5 years ago. And it was done over a weekend. So these are all new information for us as well. It was they go to the field and they collect all the information because they have a huge fieldwork team. So they gather all the answers over a weekend. A total of 65, almost 65 questions were prepared. Most of them were demographics, and some of them, and a core was related to archaeology. The questions were, first of all, we did a literature survey to understand what was, you know, if similar surveys had been done in elsewhere. We put together a pool of questions, and then we presented these questions to some experts who kindly shared their ideas with us in different places all around Turkey. And then we did come to the final set of questions, which was then put into which was tested with a pilot study by Konda. Some of our very sophisticated, complicated questions were cut because these just did not work in the field. So all those 65 questions, when you have a look at them, they are really very simple. They're very direct. They are very clear. They might even seem a little bit banal maybe, but the richness of this data lies in the fact that when you put everything together, then you have a very big understanding of what's going on. This is a Turkey. We are talking about a Turkey representative sample with this public opinion poll, and what I mean with this is, you know, all these election results that talk about how Turkey is going to vote. They are done with almost 2,000 people. In our survey, we talked to 3,601 people because we wanted to see the regional differences. So we added some numbers on top of the Turkey representative number so that we could see some of those differences, which I'm going to show you in a minute with some questions. So there is a lot of statistical details about how these methodologies have been formulated. Due to the time limitations, I'm not going to go there into that discussion. You just have to take my word for it. The results are really credible because we ask all sorts of questions that could be asked to the company, like how do you do this, how do you do that, how do you select that? So I'm happy to answer those questions during tea breaks if you're interested. Just to show you some of the people, to give you an idea who we are talking about, some scenes from the fieldwork itself, because this survey is not only, after we discovered that it is not only the first time in Turkey, but it's also the first time in the world because of its methodology. Because there have been a lot of studies to understand what certain public thinks about archaeology, but the methodology that they use was either online surveys or telephone conversations. And I am just leaving the decision to you, like whether we could have been able to gather all this information if we were using those methodologies in Turkey. So we wanted to have this face-to-face, knock on the door, do you have 15 minutes for me? I have some questions for you technique. Then we did some follow-up in-depth interviews because of some of the questions that I will show you in a minute. So without any further ado, let me present you the results. Of course, a very brief introduction to demographics. Who are we talking about? The demographics in the survey is very much linked to the Turkish demographics. So in our survey, we talked to 52% males, 48% females. It was done with age group above 18, and you can see the distribution. A very important component is education, of course, because it is very relevant to all of the answers that we got about archaeology. 6% of our respondents were illiterate, 3% literate without a diploma, and 25% primary, 16 secondary, and you can see the remaining as shown in the graph. So you might remember this graph when you are having a look at the answers about archaeology. Settlement type, rural, urban, and metropolitan, income, and another important question that Konda always asks in its surveys is, maybe we can translate it as way of life, lifestyle, hayat tarzı question. So it's a self-identification. They ask you, like, I'm going to read you 3 choices, which one would you think that you fit the most? I'm going to tell it firstly in Turkish, modern, geleneksel muhafazakar, dindar muhafazakar. As you can see, modern, traditional conservative, and religious conservative, and you can see the assigned numbers. When we come to archaeology and what we asked about archaeology, I can say that there were 3 main strands. The first one is understanding of archaeology. So knowledge, values, meaning, significance, all sorts of questions we grouped under understanding of archaeology. The second is engagement with archaeology. Am I doing something with it? Am I going, am I visiting, am I digging it up? And all sorts of questions that is making archaeology relevant, a part of my daily life right now. And the third one is general approaches, like what are my attitudes, what are my perceptions and ideas. In these kinds of surveys, the very first question that is asked, whatever you are researching, what comes to your mind when you hear the word? And in our case, of course, archaeology. Sometimes we hear, complaints about Turkish people doesn't even know what archaeology is. This is disapproved by the finding of this question because, okay, 17% didn't give an answer. They either said, I do not know, or no answer. But all of the others did give an answer. Mostly, archaeology brings to mind excavation or science of excavation. Antiquities, history are other things that come to mind. I was reading an article about a smaller study done in Thailand a couple of days ago, and they were mentioning none of the things that appear in our list appears there. No one said excavation when they heard the word archaeology. They said human remains. And no one in Turkey said human remains. So this is an interesting comparison, I think, for us to think about. But I will not make too many interpretations. I'll leave it up to you. One area that I can say there is no confusion in Turkish society is the ownership. Like, who do you think the artifacts belong to? And 85% of the people say it belongs to the state. So it is not we can say that people are very clear about this very certain point. Here's a question that made us ask more questions. You know how it happens. You start asking and then you feel the need to ask more. this was one of them. We asked, what kind of values do you attach to archaeological sites, to archaeological assets? And we listed these choices, and people could select 2 or more, so they didn't have to select only one. And the most selected answer was intangible, manevi. Almost 60%. And all of these talk about how we can promote archaeological assets as part of tourism did not have the place in the outcomes of our survey, because when people were directly asked, they still assigned intangible value as the first thing to archaeological sites. And we did, as I said at some point, we did an in-depth interviews, follow-up in-depth interviews with some of the participants to this survey, because actually we wanted to understand what they meant with intangible. I mean, we put that category, but probably my intangible is not same with your intangible. So everybody has their own intangible values, which the other categories were more direct. So what came out from that particular follow-up survey was that some of them were religious intangible. Some of them, they categorized it as secular intangible and say, when I saw all that list, which had many tangible aspects, I didn't want to go for any of them. I first felt like there was something more. So it is not very easy to explain. That is why I want to start by saying intangible first, and then, second one is sometimes monetary, sometimes artistic, sometimes scientific. Another important finding here, if you ask me, is that it's towards the very end. It's no value, değeri yoktur. It's 3%. That is also quite good outcome, I can say. We asked one open-ended question in the questionnaire, and we said, can you tell us 3 archaeological sites that come to your mind? And people the most given answer was Ayasofya, Topkapı, Ephesus. And then we we completed that list in a way, and we wanted to understand how many people know about these sites that is listed here. You can see that the highest rank in the Turkey representative, if we look at that sampling level, is Ayasofya with 78%, followed by Topkapı, Ephesus, Hasankeyf, Çatalhöyük, as you can see. Göbekli Tepe is at the very lower end of the list, but if we are to do this now, probably it would be a bit higher with all that promotion about Göbekli Tepe. Just to show you the regional differences with this question, let's have a look at the Istanbul Istanbul list. You see that the ranking is the same, but the percentages have risen. Antalya, you can see that, again, Ayasofya is the first, but you see how much Aspendos has risen to 43%. When we go to Southeast Anatolia, the ranking changes, everything changes. And yesterday we were talking about this, and we have a Turkish label for this, and no one knew whether there is a saying like that in English. Gözden uzak, gönülden ırak. This is the title, but I mean, let me know if the English. I know in Italian it exists, in English I do not know, but I think this explains that saying in Turkish. Some of the answers gave us some hope. Some of the answers made us go like, And this is one of the questions. So we asked the participants, can you tell us one single name of a civilization that lived in Turkey? And almost half of the people didn't say anything. That's why that is painted in dark gray or black. And then the first category that we receive, almost 13%, is Hittites, or most is told as Etiler in the survey, and then Ottomans, and then like 4% Lydians, Byzantines, Selçuk, and there's a 10% of other. That other also involves some civilizations that never lived in Turkey, but fine. At least they are an old civilization. So this is of course a gap that is difficult to fill after a certain point, right? Now I am moving to the engagement with archaeological assets and past. The graph is complicated, but I'm not going to talk much about it. I just wanted to show you how you can look at different demographics and an answer to a question. So the question is there an archaeological site nearby where you live? 30% said yes, 70% said no. You can see the breakdown, if you're interested, of settlement type, of lifestyle, and of education, and how it affects the way people give answers to certain questions. We did a follow-up question on this. To those who said yes, we said, can you tell us the name of that place? And the names were very accurate. So if there is a höyük nearby, it is known with the name and everything. So if they give yes as an answer, they always have an idea what they are referring to. So it is not like, yeah, yes, there were some ruins in somewhere over. It is not like that. So it is very well known and identifiable within that place. Okay, so when I presented the results of the survey for the first time at the BIA, like a year ago, we played a game, which we are not doing it here, but I call it Who Wants to Be a Billionaire game. Then it turned out that sophisticated technology has a name, it's called keypads. So all the people who came to my talk were given keypads, and I asked them, can you please let us know, like, well, how do you think that the Turkish people would have responded to this question? So we had some questions, and I asked the audience how they would think the questions would have been answered. So this was one question that puzzled everyone, say, because it also puzzled us. We asked what civilizations have formed today's Turkey. And there were 4 choices, and we asked the participants to choose only one. Turks, civilizations of thousands of years, Muslims, Selçuks, and Ottomans. Almost 50% said civilizations of thousands of years. Some of the questions in the survey, we really talk and taught a lot how to ask, why to ask. I don't remember talking much about this question. But when the answers came, this became the question that we talked the most about. And Konda, people from Konda, when they scanned the results, they stopped there and said, this is the most important finding that you have, because this shows that in Turkey we can still live together. So there we said, they made us ask this question. It wasn't us. So this is, we can, of course, at some point talk more about these findings. I see Cevat Hocam there, and this is his question to the contribution to the survey, because we also asked his opinions, and he has been very supportive of the whole idea. Actually, the idea of doing the survey comes from him. And when we asked him, like, what kind of questions should we add, he said, why don't you ask people whether they keep an object in their house with an intangible value? So we asked, and only 1 out of 4 people said that they keep an object in their house because it has an intangible value. And the things that we asked, a follow-up question, and the things that were listed were mostly like a panorama of Turkey, I would say. Bakır kaplar, vazolar, mostly jewelries from families, always small portable objects which you can just grab in case of an emergency. So these were more or less the kind of objects that came. Which channels do we asked them, which channels do you use to reach out to information about archaeology? Television is still at the top. And it is an important finding that we built other activities within this project. Very briefly, we also asked what kind of engagements. 48% said they have visited an archaeological site, 12 museum card, 63 think that there are people don't visit because of the entrance fees. 75% said that they would call the police if they were to see an illegal excavation. How about the 52 that didn't visit an archaeological site? They said 20% of them said, I am going to visit. It's in my plans. Okay. 60% said, I would have if I had an opportunity. And the other 20% said, no and no way, leave me alone. So this is another important finding about the engagement. An important question, has anyone you know found a treasure? Not you, not have you heard of stories about treasure finding? Has anyone you know? 7% said yes, 93 no. And a couple of slides about the general approaches. So we ask, how much do you agree to this statement? Historical artifacts could be sacrificed for road and dam construction, 70% no. So this is a good finding to argue our cases more in the future. And as the last slide, some findings from the general, again, approaches. So we read a sentence and then we ask them to rate. Almost 50% approve the works of foreign archaeologists in Turkey because they think it's beneficial for the development of archaeology. 90% said the smuggled artifacts should be returned back to Turkey. 82% says, I see the archaeological remains as part of my own culture. 80% treasure hunting is a crime and should be prevented. And 67% think that archaeological sites are not sufficiently protected in Turkey. And I thank you. I am a little bit over the time right now. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. And I have to repeat that I'm very pleased to be here in such an insightful symposium, be part of it. Just last night, I realized that I was so taken by the community archaeology and maybe the pessimism that I had not included even a map for you to show where Komana is. And here is the map I just added this morning so I can geographically locate you. Komana is approximately 10 kilometers northeast of Tokat. It's a primarily Hellenistic sanctuary site, but providing great amounts of information on the medieval period in the last decade. So archaeological research began in 2004 at Komana and continued to this date with methods ranging from reconnaissance survey to excavations. At and around the site, destruction of especially archaeological heritage, mostly through illicit digging, is immense and has been increasing ever since. This, in part, is due to a general disintegration of conditions of the country, economy, politics, etc., but mostly due to a lack of awareness resulting from lack of education. Thus, Komana Archaeological Research Project put educational programs for women and children in the center of heritage conservation activities. Small-scale education programs evolved into participatory action research with the intention to achieve long-lasting success in raising heritage awareness and protection of the archaeological site. The short-term success of these efforts is varied, however, they have led our team to think deeper into relevance, community engagement, ownership, benefit, and the role of archaeologists within this very complicated dialogue with the public. This paper aims at taking a critical stance to the efforts of an archaeological team in capacity building for heritage protection and suggests improvements to our perception of and attitude towards local communities as archaeologists, especially in rural Turkey. The public archaeology work at Komana, which began as a didactic endeavor, evolved into a communication attempt through participatory action research. Participatory action research is an approach to research in communities that emphasizes participation and action. Change is sought collaboratively, following reflection, collective inquiry, shared experience, and history. It is considered a democratic, equitable, liberating, and life-enhancing qualitative inquiry. Participatory action participatory approach in archaeological fieldwork has been an inevitable direction for many projects around the world due to the increasing responsibility of archaeological teams in engaging the local communities into their work, especially for effective sustenance of heritage they are uncovering. Additionally, the growing global financial insecurity has been building considerable pressure upon heritage professionals, including archaeologists, with increasing economic expectations from heritage as a source of tourism. Participatory action research necessitates effective community engagement at the center of its methodology, and this approach falls under the scope of public archaeology. Public archaeology in the 70s meant, quote, efforts to record and preserve archaeological remains threatened by developments on behalf of and with the support of the public. End of quote. However, the notion of public archaeology is now understood to diverge from country to country, therefore it's not possible to offer a universally accepted definition. According to Matsuda and Okamura, the differences are due to the variations in the development of A, archaeological theory, B, its practice, and C, the changing meaning of archaeology in different parts of the world. The literature on public archaeology is exhaustive and reveals that it has become a widely accepted field in academia across the world. Participatory action research within archaeology is likewise gaining wider recognition. The underlying philosophy, which forms the foundation of this type of research, emerged first in sociology, later followed by anthropology, with reflexivity in social theory. According to Nazaruk, quote, reflexivity is the process of reflection which takes itself as the object, in other words, reflecting on oneself as the object of the provocative, end of quote. Reflexivity as the ability of a researcher to develop a critical stance in evaluating her relationship to her own field is the definition which interests us for our purposes here. Such an awareness for a researcher in the field of archaeology is necessary for several reasons. Firstly, archaeology cannot become an instrument to political goals. Secondly, it is necessary to overcome the unbalanced power relations between the academic and non-academic in perceiving the past. And lastly, it is imperative to be able to evaluate the causal relation in our research in order to assume a critical stance towards possibly unethical and destructive aspects of archaeology. To put it more lightly, archaeology can no longer be practiced isolated from the society and its immediate environment, and the archaeologist has a responsibility to recognize his or her role in this practice. Almost any study or even a social media entry regarding public archaeology in Turkey begins with the statement that public archaeology is a very new concept and an overlooked area of study. However, it's the scarce publications that underrepresent its practice in the field, which began already in the 70s. Of course, the pioneer is Halet Çambel, who was personally involved with the local community at Karatepe, where she was conducting archaeological excavations in the 70s. Since then, many archaeological projects have been organizing public archaeology activities in their local communities. Aşıklıhöyük, Aktopraklıköyük, Çatalhöyük, Kerkenes, Ayzanoy, and Sagalassos projects are among most visible, and such examples can be multiplied, including also surveys. There are also numerous projects designed and led by museums, universities, and NGOs in Turkey. Thus, there's no scarcity in public archaeology projects. What is scarce is the critical position towards why and how the community is engaged, and what sort of an approach is suitable for Turkey, and even more specifically, for rural and urban communities, for the coast and the inland, for the west and the east, and the like. There is no debate on the role of archaeologists in heritage protection through community engagement and ownership of the intellectual property and its manipulation. Furthermore, there's a general miscommunication between heritage conservation professionals, planners, decision makers, and archaeologists, both in the classroom and in the field. Besides, community archaeology projects' relationship to sustainability goals for the heritage site, the local community, fieldwork itself, is not sufficiently dealt with. Sustainability in archaeology has been misinterpreted as a resource contributing to sustainable society in socioeconomic and environmental terms, while it's in fact an integral part of that society. Thus, projects aiming at sustainable archaeology have found themselves organizing events beyond the scope of their own research in archaeology, assuming a bridging role between archaeology and tourism income. The relations between the local community around Komana and the archaeological team began in a rather organic way through the invitation of the Bula village Muhtar to build the project compound in their village. A piece of land was rented for the construction of a new building in 2006, just 2 years after the beginning of the surveys. In 2007, the team was residing in Bula village, a village with only 22 households. The Bula community was involved in the archaeological work, also in a rather spontaneous way. This was mainly due to the special situation of myself as the project director, who happened to have a very young daughter at the time, accompanied by my mother-in-law. The first group to discover what we were doing were the children, who came to play with my daughter. In a short while, my mother-in-law was gathering young school children in the excavation house for book reading and arts. In 2009, excavations began at Hamamtepe, near another larger village, and the men from both Bula and later on Gümenek were employed as workmen. By 2010, children of Bula and men of Bula and Gümenek were already exposed to the archaeological work. In 2010, I invited one of our graduate students and her sister, Mina and Zeynep Şentek, to organize more structured activities for children. 10 primary school kids, ages between 8 and 13, were offered archaeology and art history lectures. They were taken to the field for a visit, experienced excavation firsthand through mock trenches prepared in the garden of the house, and attended an arts workshop on art through the ages, resulting in an exhibition. In 2012, 3 workshops were held with 14 children, ages between 7 and 15. The first workshop was an exercise to stimulate imaginative thinking regarding the past. They had a site visit, interviewed the elderly, then reenacted the past with accumulated knowledge and imagination. In the second workshop, cakes with archaeological layers were eaten, during which stratigraphy and excavation techniques were discussed. The third workshop involved a visit to the Tokat Museum, describing and finding objects. Children had been very receptive towards all of these activities. More girls attended than boys. In order to engage women more actively, we organized a trip to the site, followed by a meeting at the house for an interpretation of what they have seen and how relevant they felt those to be to their lives. A PowerPoint presentation was prepared to create an agent for discussing some of the issues we deemed significant. Archaeology was surely at the center of these meetings, but we also exchanged experiences on raising children, dealing with family life, cooking, chores, and the like. These were great opportunities to connect and overcome the feeling of diffidence on both sides. In 2013, children and women remained at the heart of activities. Children, this time from 3 different villages, were taken to the site for a photography workshop. In the winter months, 3 sewing machines were bought for the use of local community. Coşku Kocabıyık worked on stylizing motifs from Komana ceramics with the women in Bula to be applied on fabric. Bags and cushions were made and ornamented with these motifs. In 2014, these efforts were further formalized with the foundation of an association at Bula, led by Ceren İlter, a planning student from METU. Komana Rural Development Association was founded, including the Women of Bula on its board, to be able to apply for projects on sustainable development in rural areas. Indeed, a sewing workshop was organized with the collaboration of the governorship, Public Education Center, Halk Eğitim Merkezi, and Turkish Employment Agency, İşkur. The governor provided all supplies. Halk Eğitim Merkezi designed a course and arranged for a teacher, and İşkur paid a daily allowance to women who enrolled for this course. The teacher, a fresh graduate herself, traveled to Bula every day from the city for 4 months in the winter of 2015. In May, certificates were presented to the women, and 120 items that were made throughout the course were bought by the governorship. The women were promised, also by the governor, supplies and guarantee of purchase of all items made if they continued this craft. Summer approached, agriculture intensified, not a single item was produced. In the November of 2015, within the same scope of efforts for enhanced engagement, a workshop in a Tokat hotel was organized in order to bring together the excavation team, this time with the local authorities, expanding in hierarchy from muhtars to governor, representatives of relevant civil offices, the museum, provincial development agency, NGOs, municipality, and the villagers, in order to identify problems, expectations, and to discuss future plans in the light of these preliminary observations. In 2017, a participatory action research project was developed by myself and Anla Ataöv, a planner from METU. The goal had been to devise constructive ways to evaluate the impact of the archaeological work at the site on the local communities and empower them to make decisions regarding their physical and social environment, eventually resulting in effective conservation of the site. 3 exploratory activities involving different stakeholders indicated that, in fact, there is administrative and social capacity for managing Komana and its environs as a heritage site. 2 potential projects were identified: an interdisciplinary site management planning project and an agricultural heritage project. Since this project, Ceren İlter began writing her master's thesis entitled The Dialogue Between Cultural Heritage, Development Policies and Local Governments, the Case of Komana, Tokat, in the Urban Policy Planning and Local Governments Graduate Program. I'm missing that slide, sorry. Through the years of public archaeology work we conducted at Komana, we had a chance to think through the impact of each activity, and we searched for ways to truly empower the local communities. One great criticism we had for ourselves was that we have designed predominantly didactic activities, especially in the beginning. Merriman describes this kind of public archaeology with the deficit model, in which, quote, experts have a duty to remedy the deficit of scientific knowledge in public as if public is an empty vessel. In a way, this was necessary because a general course on archaeology is non-existent in Turkish education system at any level, and in most parts of Turkey, any public archaeology activity or any conversation in a local context needs to begin with an introduction to archaeology. And this is a fact, Işılay. They don't know about archaeology. So anyhow, curiosity is the driver of self-directed learning, and before curiosity, a certain level of knowledge is necessary. What most of us miss in this sequence is that learning may take place through different methods, which does not necessitate classroom environment. Open engagement and participation may the direction, but more importantly, educators need to be included in any such endeavor. Open engagement had been an organic part of our work. Participation opportunities as workmen, cook, drivers have always been available, but we try to enhance these opportunities through engaging the workers in the thinking process of planning and technical aspects of fieldwork, such as using the equipment. The cook on site was often asked to wash pottery and learn pottery drawing. The local girls working in the kitchen and cleaning were actively involved in organizing the public archaeology workshops. These efforts had unquantifiable effects. They were mainly helpful in building dialogue, mutuality of trust, and respect. We also observed an increasing sense of belonging to a team, becoming part of an effort, becoming visible, and empowerment for men and young girls. All these sentiments brought about a realization of significance of the archaeological work and its potentials for the local communities. The second great criticism is on our perception of village communities in rural Turkey, especially on what and how they think and what they need. For example, we were naively convinced that the women needed certain amount of economic independence or a contributing role in their families, and handicrafts was the agent closer to their hearts. So we organized the handicrafts workshop and cleverly included motifs from Komana pottery in order to introduce them to medieval and Selçukid art, and at the same time to commodify the heritage elements. It remained as a very isolated attempt, and none took the initiative to continue this into a profitable business. There are, of course, very complicated socioeconomic and religious reasons behind the failure, and it should in no way lessen the importance of such endeavors. This was a top-down approach, and its success was restricted, mostly due to overpowering popular culture with its strong macho discourse. Finally, I would like to say a few things about the participatory action research methods, not necessarily as a criticism, but as an eye-opener for future efforts. Ataev, in her report, wrote, quote, "Our experience indicated that it's a very difficult task to initiate a participatory transformation process in contexts dominated by profit-oriented behavior." End of quote. On the other hand, Hodder maintains that participants need to have a stake, an economic benefit for the success of the project. I completely agree with this statement under the economic and political circumstances in Turkey, especially in the last decade, but this benefit may not necessarily be from the heritage itself. The main source of income in most of Tokat, and especially in these fertile valleys along the Yeşilırmak River, is agriculture. The dominant role of our agricultural income in the region is not a modern thing. In fact, we hear from Strabo of the wealth and luxury of the sacred sanctuary and its complete property planted with vines. The fertile valleys of Dazimon, Tokat, had been used by Byzantine armies as camping areas with abundant food for both the armies and the horses. This abundance must have continued for centuries with possible interruptions, since excavations revealed a wealth of agricultural crops during the 12th, 14th centuries under the Selçukid rule. Crops included grains, fruit and nut trees, vines, and even rice. These inspired us to think further on agricultural heritage and its possible mediator role in establishing stronger connections between the local farmers and this land's past through ancient farming instead of mainstream historical narratives. A compilation of all data regarding the landscape in the longue durée, including material remains as well as sensory experience as present in historical records and experience today, may provide the necessary background for developing new sustainable methods for protecting and maintaining this valuable heritage. This data may then be translated into an open digital format for crowdsourcing and education. It's hoped to encourage farmers in the future to turn to a wider variety of crops and most demanded conventional farming, which proves to be more profitable in the long run, especially more profitable than the greenhouses. Alternative agricultural products and methods are highly sought for, and a deeper understanding of the problems of the rural communities with participatory actions designed primarily for this purpose have a potential to lead us towards more successful community archaeology in the future. Thank you.
Zeynep Perez is Associate Professor at Istanbul Technical University, Department of Architecture, and teaches in the Restoration Program. Perez has conducted research in various areas, but primarily the history of architectural modernization in rural Turkey. She has also taken part in several cultural inventory projects in rural Turkey. Since 1997, Perez has been conducting heritage management and architectural preservation projects in prehistoric sites in Kırklareli province in eastern Thrace. She has taken part in the documentation and publication of Aşağıpınar excavations and also designed the open-air site museums of Aşağıpınar and Kanlıgeçit. Today, Eres will talk about heritage management and public awareness with a focus on her research experiences in the prehistoric site of Aşağıpınar, Kırklareli.
Teşekkürler. Ben de ANAMED'e ve bu değerli sempozyumun düzenleme komitesine bu sempozyuma beni davet ettikleri için çok teşekkür ediyorum. Burada bulunmaktan ve sunum yapmaktan büyük bir onur duyuyorum. So, the main subject of this symposium is World Heritage Archaeological Sites. And I have much appreciated listening to the papers on World Heritage Archaeological Sites of Turkey. I learned a lot. However, Turkey's cultural heritage is not limited by the sites listed in the UNESCO. There are still other sites as important and having the potential to provide a much greater diversity of our heritage. Aşağıpınar is a prehistoric site in eastern Thrace near the town of Kırklareli. The excavation at Aşağıpınar has begun in 1993 and ended just in the summer. The conservation and public display projects has begun in 1997 and they are still continuing. In this paper, I want to explain briefly our heritage management projects and to focus on our 22 years long experience and self-education actually. Aşağıpınar excavation is a joint project of Istanbul University Prehistory Department and German Archaeological Institute. Professor Mehmet Özdağ is the director of the excavation and I have been working as an architect since 1996 at the site. In Aşağıpınar, more than 4,000 square meters were excavated and 7 cultural layers were exposed. In one trench, we can observe all the cultural layers of the site, but the height of the archaeological deposit is only 3 meters, and in this very low prehistoric mound, the Neolithic way of living from 6400 BC to 4700 BC was discovered. In this 1700 years long history, the inhabitants of Aşağıpınar have always used wood and mud as construction material, so that we can only unearth such kind of very thin and fragile building remains. Bottle and tub construction technique was used in every architectural layer of Aşağıpınar, but when we studied all the different layers, we recognized that in each layer the inhabitants used different type of wooden frame structures. Aşağıpınar was excavated on a very large area from topsoil to the virgin soil, and our studies about its architecture, pottery, flintstone, and any other archaeological material show us that the site has a critical importance in the Neolithic period. One of the most significant outcomes of Aşağıpınar excavations has been to present a picture on how immigrant Neolithic farmers coming from Anatolia being used to mud brick architecture became adapted to forested habitat, developing a new architectural technique that will be the basis of European prehistoric architectural system. In this respect, Aşağıpınar may be considered as peripheral to Anatolia, but it is the core of later European prehistoric cultures. But even though the site is scientifically very important, it is not easy to preserve and the architecture remains and to display the area to the public. So we decided firstly to understand and interpret the architecture and the settlement fabric of the area, and then to develop the preservation and public display projects. The in situ architecture remains, and the non-in situ, actually scattered burnt mud fragments, have been the main sources for interpretation. We studied all the mud fragments from each layer of the excavation area. We drew the reconstitution of each fragment, and after these studies, we understood different timber frame techniques in detail. However, this research was not enough for understanding the main construction technique of each layer. Our second source was the traditional rural architecture of Thrace. The tradition of making bottom and dove buildings still persists in the Istranca mountainous region. We thought that we can use this area as a laboratory for understanding the architecture in Aşağıpınar. We did architectural survey in 65 villages and documented different kinds of timber frame structures. We especially focus on crack-like buildings since they are similar to layer 2 structures of Aşağıpınar. We documented them intensively, and we decided to use the term crack-like in English as the construction technique is similar to medieval crack frame buildings in Britain. We documented all different types of crack-like buildings. We studied typology of plan and the cross-section of the structures. Then we let a master builder to construct a barn at Aşağıpınar, and we documented the construction process. After all these studies, we did reconstitution drawings of the buildings. Here we can see the layer 5 and layer 4 houses of the Aşağıpınar. And our most interesting and most difficult study was the reconstitution of layer 2 houses, actually. During this process, we also thought about the preservation and public display issues. In 1997, I began to my MA thesis with the subject of preservation and presentation problems of Aşağıpınar. We decided to design an open-air museum at the site of Aşağıpınar. Our aims are to protect the site, to exhibit it to the public, to share our knowledge with the community, and so to develop an awareness on prehistoric cultural heritage. Because the architectural remains of the site were in such a poor state, we decided to construct a protective shelter for protecting the relatively preserved examples of the remains, and meanwhile to build a village museum which displays the Neolithic way of living in this region. For this purpose, we decided to use the information of layer 2 buildings because our studies revealed that layer 2 settlement is a very characteristic settlement for this region. And the second reason has been inspired by our surveys in the modern villages. We observed there are similar crack-like buildings in the region, and because the villagers do not use them anymore, they are in a very poor state, and in most cases, the villagers sell them as wood to tradesmen from Istanbul. So we decided to buy some of these buildings, to dismantle and to carry them to Aşağıpınar. We reconstructed them in Aşağıpınar, and in this process we extremely experienced that the construction of these simple buildings, we need real master builders. Not the inexperienced villagers can construct them. In 2008, we established the first exhibition. This open-air museum is not a reconstruction of Aşağıpınar Layer 2. It is not a 100% true model of the site. This is not our argument. It is just a simulation of a local village in prehistoric period in this region. In the first exhibition hall, we placed explanation panels and house models of Aşağıpınar for giving basic knowledge about the archaeology and Aşağıpınar. We wrote the text and designed the panels. We tried to write the subjects in a simple way, which was not easy for us actually, and here you can see some examples. So what is archaeology and what is not archaeology, the importance of the Kırklareli region in the cultural history, our aims, our goals in Kırklareli, so who we are, what we want to do, and the info panels for explaining Aşağıpınar archaeological site. After opening the exhibition, we observed the visitors and we realized that the people do not want to read long texts. 3D interpretations and models are much more interesting for them. So we prepared 1:50 scale models of each settlement layer. And in the second exhibition hall, we prepared 1:1 scale models of Aşağıpınar houses as well. In the third exhibition hall, we prepared displays of Neolithic craftsmanship, carpenters, bean makers, and so on. The original finds of Aşağıpınar are in Kırklareli Archaeology Museum, of course. And at the site, we exhibit copies of the selected finds with simple explanation panels. Here you may see we didn't write long text, just the terms and the drawings. Our project includes display of Neolithic natural environment as well. According to the information given by our archaeozoologists and archaeobotanists, we prepared models of wild and domesticated animals in Neolithic period. We tried to create the fauna of the region as well. And in 2015, we prepared a comprehensively revised project according to our experience in 16 years. The most new idea in this stage is to exhibit the traditional cultural environment of Kırklareli region, because we observed that the traditional husbandry culture of 19th and 20th century has already lost, and the young generation of the region doesn't have any idea about this culture. So again, with models, we display the last step of traditional agriculture. Aşağıpınar Open Air Museum project is still in experimental level. We continued the process besides the excavations. And during the planning process, we thought about the sustainability of this museum as well. We argued that the sustainability of this project we argued that for the sustainability of this project, there should be other cultural projects so that visitors can spend their daytime in the region, or visitors from Istanbul, for example, might have the opportunity to spend their weekend time in this region. So after preparation of Aşağıpınar Open Air Museum project in 1999, we immediately focused on large-scale projects. 300 meters to Aşağıpınar, we have another excavation area named Gelecek, and there are some other archaeological sites in this region. We defined this area as archaeological sites in southern sector of Kırklareli and designed projects for each site. Here you may see the Gelecek Open Air Museum. We also prepared a concept project for Tumulusi, which was excavated in 1936 under the order of Atatürk, and we also prepared heritage projects for the region of Kırklareli. Our excavation team is multidisciplinary. We, as our conservation department of ITU, studied the urban and rural heritage of the entire region, and the archaeology team did survey in the entire region as well. So we have quite a comprehensive cultural inventory of the region. Because of this documentation, we can develop ideas about upper scale and long-term cultural heritage planning of the region. However, of course, these are only our suggestions, our future prospects. We are not a part of central or local authorities who are responsible for upper scale development planning. So until now, I tried to explain you theoretical background of our heritage project and our implementations on site. From the very beginning on, to develop an awareness on culture, heritage, and especially on Aşağıpınar was our main goal. We defined two stages for developing public awareness. Firstly, the citizens of Kırklareli, as they are the local owners of Aşağıpınar, then the people from metropolitan city of Istanbul, or in international level, people from our neighbors, Bulgaria and Greece. As the citizens of Kırklareli are our main focus, let me introduce you the town of Kırklareli briefly. The population is only 60,000. It is a very small town actually. The education level of the town is higher than the average of Turkey. Generally, the citizens are not conservative. They live really in a modern way. There are many local NGOs, and most of them are very active, and the community is especially aware towards protection of natural environment. They usually prosecute suit against the state for wrong stone quarries, thermal plants, and so on. But when we have begun to excavate in 1993, the citizens of Kırklareli town didn't have any interest in cultural heritage. According to them, they don't have any valuable archaeological sites such as Ephesus or Pergamon. Even their nice urban fabric was not something valuable for them. So, when we established the first exhibition hall in 2008, we prepared brochures, and in time we prepared different types of brochures. We gave number of public lectures in the town during the excavation periods or in winter seasons as well. We also prepared booklets for local and governmental administrative bodies. In those publications, we explained all our projects comprehensively and our requests and wishes from them, of course. And in 2008, parallel to our exhibition activities, we established a local NGO. 21 citizens of Kırklareli and our team established the Kırklareli Cultural Assets Association. We initiated the process, but we have never been a part of administrative body of this association. It is really a local NGO. Step by step, when we prepared a new exhibition, they organized opening ceremonies. And except the summer season, we are not on site, but the members of Kırklareli Cultural Assets Association guide the visitors. They explain correct and basic history of Aşağıpınar. The high schools of Kırklareli and the neighbor cities such as Edirne and Tekirdağ are the intensive groups of visitors. Primary school children are visiting the site as well. And I have to mention that most of our members in the association are retired primary school teachers. They, of course, very well know how to manage young children and how to explain complicated information in a simple way. And from 2008 on, we have close contact with the members of the association. We give lectures to them about archaeology, heritage, and Aşağıpınar, and they express their opinion about our designs, especially about our explanation panels. We always have feedback from them during our design process, and we revise our projects according to their remarks. Because Kırklareli is a border town, the association had the chance to develop EU projects with Bulgaria. In 2014 and 16, they had 2 EU projects, and with this budget, we could prepare detailed construction projects and some implementations in Aşağıpınar and capacity building activities for young archaeologists. All this work provides us visibility in the town, and slowly, the local and governmental administrative bodies began to create an interest for our works at Aşağıpınar. Here you may see some events of Kırklareli Museum at Aşağıpınar. The children try to make pottery or the traditional musicians. And this year, the Kırklareli Directorate of Culture and Tourism got an EU funding for further conservation studies in Aşağıpınar and another funding from Trace Development Agency for the construction of the visitor center. So after 20 years, the administrative body of Kırklareli is now in the heritage planning process. And we have a notebook for our visitors because their ideas are important for us and for our future designs. And this list shows us the visitors' characteristics. Not only the students are our guests, the NGOs from Istanbul or from other Thrace cities, the individuals, tourists from Bulgaria and Greece, and every year more than 5,000 people are visiting the site. And all these visitors are guided by the members of Kırklareli Cultural Assets Association. They work totally as volunteers. When visitors get an appointment from the members, firstly, the members go to the site, they open and clean the exhibition halls, and then they guide the visitors. I really want to thank them for this incredible effort. I want to finish my presentation with a small anecdote. Especially individual visitors from Istanbul asked to our members if they really do this service voluntarily. The visitors cannot imagine such a service without any payment. However, this is true. The Kırklareli Cultural Assets Association works voluntarily for the preservation of the cultural heritage in Turkey, and they are the guides and the guards of Aşağıpınar. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Zafer Derin. Zafer Derin is Associate Professor of Archaeology at Ege University. He has been working on various cultural and material aspects of prehistorical settlements and societies of Anatolia. Up until today, he has taken part in surveys and excavations in various parts of Anatolia. But he is currently directing the excavation at Yeşilova Höyük, which was discovered in 2003 in the heart of the city of Izmir. I suppose Yeşilova is known to be the oldest settlement in Western Anatolia. Please correct me if I'm wrong. The site is increasingly well known with its visitor center that was built at the site more recently. Unfortunately, I haven't been there but heard great things about this place in terms of its architectural structure, its maintenance, as well as the staff working at the center. So today I feel lucky to be here and learn more about the visitor center of Yeşilova Höyük. Floor is yours. Thank you.
Teşekkür ederim Sayın Başkan. Sayın davetliler, öncelikle bu sempozyumu düzenleyenler için ve davetlileri için de içtenlikle teşekkür etmeyi isterim. Türkçe devam edeceğim sunumuma. Biraz önce de Zeynep hocamızın da belirttiği gibi aslında Yeşilova Höyüğü de aynı zamanda kent içinde yer alan bir yerleşim alanı, bir prehistorik yerleşim. Size bir kent içindeki yani kent içi arkeolojisinin problemlerini de ortaya koyan ve bunun çözümünü de bir ölçüde kolaylaştıran çalışmalarımızdan bir örneğini burada aktarmak istiyorum. Öncelikle tabii yerleşim alanına şöyle baktığımızda kentin içindeyiz. İzmir kentindeyiz. İzmir'in içinde Bornova Ovası'nda Manda Deresi ile işte Gökdere arasında yer alan bir alüvyon, kalın bir alüvyon tabakası altında kalmış olan bir höyük. Yüzeyde hiçbir şey belli olmayan, neredeyse 2 metrelik alüvyonun altında yer alan bir merkez. Ve aynı zamanda burası kentin içinde yer alan ve bilinen en erken tek merkez olarak karşımıza çıkıyor. Biraz Yeşilova Höyüğü'nden bahsedeyim. Aslında Yeşilova Höyüğü bir prehistorik bir alanın içinde yer alıyor. Hemen yakınlarında Yaztepe ve İpekli Kuyu ile birlikte yayılarak gelişen bir prehistorik süreç burası. Ve Bornova Ovası'nın ortasındaki bu alan, yaklaşık 800 metre çapındaki alan, İzmir'in tarih öncesi yerleşim alanı. Yaklaşık 70 bin metrekareden fazla bir alana yayılan Yeşilova Höyüğü'nde Neolitik dönemden Roma dönemine kadar birçok kültür tespit edilmiş. Ortaya çıkartılan kültür katları yüzeyden başlayarak Roma dönemi, Tunç Çağı, Kalkolitik ve Neolitik çağları içermekte. Höyük'teki ilk yerleşim günümüzden 8500 yıl önce Neolitik çağda başlamış ve Neolitik çağın 4. katı olarak gözüken en uzun süreli ve kalın kültür katı en iyi bilinen sürecini temsil etmekte. 10 mimari tabakaya sahip olan bu süreç kendi içinde 3 evre içinde gelişim göstermiş. 4. kat olarak Neolitik dönemin son katı olan 4, 1 ve 2. evreleri Höyük'teki en uzun yerleşilen ve mimari kalıntılarıyla en iyi günümüze kadar ulaşan sürecini kapsamakta. Yeşilova Höyüğü bulgularına göre M.Ö. 6000 ile 5700 yılları arasındaki bu kata ait olan ya da Neolitik dönemin son sürecini içeren bu kat en kalabalık ve en gelişkin sürecini temsil ediyor. Genellikle birbirinden ayrı inşa edilmiş mekanlar bu dönemde işlerinde birçok işlikleri de barındırmakta. Günlük olarak tahıl üretilen, taş aletler yapan, keramik ve pişmiş toprak eserler üreten birçok işlik bu alanda, özellikle de kemik üreten işlikler tespit edilmiş durumda. Aynı zamanda bütün bunlar da üretimin aynı alan içinde evlerde gerçekleştirildiğinde ortaya koymakta. Bunların dışında özellikle bu alanda güneşi anımsatan motifleriyle birçok da mühür ele geçmiş durumda. Bu da Yeşilova Höyüğü Neolitik toplumunun organize bir yapıya sahip olduğunu göstermekte. Bu dönem aslında denizin eksi 35 metrede olduğu bir süreç. Yani İzmir'de denizin çok daha uzakta bulunduğu bir dönem ve bu dönem içinde de çok farklı bir coğrafya yapısı var. Ama bu coğrafya yapısı içinde Yeşilova Höyüğü'nde yaşayanlar hem tarım hem avcılık yapmışlar. Özellikle de çiftçilik, buğday, arpa, mercimek gibi ürünleri yetiştirdikleri, buna ek olarak da aynı zamanda balık avladıkları bilinmekte. İzmir'in geleneksel balığının, çıpranın da en erken örneklerini yine burada bulduk. Bunun dışında başka tür balıklar, işte vatoz gibi ya da deniz kestanesi gibi şeyleri de yakalamış, yemişler. Ama yine bir başka gerçeği İzmir'in midyeyi de çok sevmişler. Bol miktarda istiridye ve midyeyi de aynı alanda tespit edebiliyoruz. Bunlar tabii Neolitik süreç içinde İzmir'deki bu prehistorik dönemdeki belki İzmir'le de doğrudan ilintili unsurların, bulguların ortaya çıktığını göstermesi açısından önemli. Burada yani Yeşilova Höyüğü'nde ilk Egeli topluluklar yaşamış. Göller bölgesi, Kapadokya ve hatta uzaklarda Melos adasıyla da ticari ve kültürel ilişkiler kurmuşlar. Ortaya çıkan bu bulgular, mimari kalıntılar, avcı, toplayıcı, tarımcı bu toplumun aynı zamanda kendi kültürel sürecini de yarattığını ortaya koymakta. Tabii kentin içinde 2003 yılında keşfettiğimiz, 2005 yılında da kazısına başladığımız bu arkeolojik alan ilk bulduğumuz anda oldukça kötü durumda bir çevreye sahipti. Kentin içindeydik ama henüz daha yapılaşmanın yeni alanda başladığı bir süreç içindeydik. Gündüz bile dolaşılamayacak düzeyde işte uyuşturucu madde ticaretini yapanlardan birçok kötü gruplara kadar bu alanlar onların hakimiyeti altındaydı. Kentin içinde tabii böyle bir alanı hem arkeolojik çalışmaları yürütmek hem de kontrol altına alabilmek, aynı zamanda insanların da bir yaşam alanı haline sunabilmek bizim için önemli problemlerden biriydi. Bunların dışında burada toprak alımı sürekli yapılıyordu. Toprakları alıp başka alanlara götürüyorlardı ve molozlar da aynı alanlara dökülebiliyordu. İşte bu şartlar altında başladığımız çalışmalarda kazı alanlarında özellikle yangınlarla da sık sık karşılaşıyorduk ama çalışmalar sırasında kentin içinde olduğumuzun farkındaydık ve bu alanı en azından belli bir süreç içinde gerçekten yaşanabilir ve aynı zamanda bilimsel çalışmalar üretilebilir şekle sokmak durumundaydık. Arkeolojik bir kent içindeki bir arkeolojik alan ile bazen kent dışındaki bir arkeolojik alandaki fiziksel ve kültürel erişebilirlikte karşılaşılan sorunlar ve bu sorunlara getirilecek çözümler birbirinden farklı olabilmekte. Biz de bu sorunların çözümüne yönelik ilk planlamaları 2005 yılında aslında kazı evi olarak da kullandığımız küçücük bir kulübede başladık. Kent içindeki Yeşilova Höyüğü sit alanını ve kültürel varlıkları kontrol altına alabilmek için kazı ile birlikte çevreyi toplum yaşamına da uygun bir şekilde dönüştürmeyi ve bununla ilgili ilk çalışmalarda önceliğimiz olmalıydı. Arkeolojik miras alanlarını özellikle de prehistorik bir alan düşündüğümüzde algılanır kılmak ve bu alanda özellikle anlaşılabilir, klasik kentler gibi anlaşılabilir ifade edilebilir bir arkeolojik alan halinde sunabilmek önemli. Biz de bunun için arkeolojik alanın farkındalığını sağlayabilmek için kent içinde olmamızın getirdiği avantajı dikkate alarak öncelikli hedefimizi belirledik. Bu hedefimiz eğitim olmalıydı. Ve hedef kitlemizin de özellikle çocukların olması yönünde gerektiğini düşündük. Arkeolojik miras alanlarının özellikle farkındalığının sağlanması sürecinde çocuklara arkeolojik alanın korunması gerekli bir kültür varlığı yapan miras değerlerini algılatmak önemliydi. Bilindiği gibi kazı alanları genellikle yasaklı alanlardır. Yani birçok alana kolay giremezsiniz. Ancak öğren yeri ya da arkeopark statüsüne ulaştıklarında gezilip görülebilen bir alana dönüşebilirler. Kazının ana merkezini oluşturan özellikle kazı evleri de ziyaret alanlarının çok daha dışında hassas ve özel yerlerdir. Bütün bunları düşündüğümüzde bir prehistorik döneme ait kısıtlı boyutta bulgular veren kazıyı kültürel miras ile ilgili bir eğitim alanına nasıl dönüştürebilirdik? Özellikle böyle bir çevre içinde çocuklar için kültürel mirasımızın öğretilmesine yönelik projeler gerçekleştirebilir miydik? Kazı alanlarının özellikle de girilmesi sakıncalı alanların olması, özgün kalıntılara dokunulmaması gibi bazı kısıtlamaları kaldırarak ziyaretçilere geleneksel müzecilik anlayışından farklı bir sergileme anlayışını sunmalıydık. Ziyaretçilerin önlerinde herhangi bir engel olmaksızın kerpiçe, sıvaya, taşına dokunabilmesi, malzemeyi, mekanı ve yaşayışı deneyimleyebilmesi ana hedeflerimiz oldu. Hedefimiz kent içinde bilim, eğitim, turizm işlevine sahip toplumun ilgisini çekerek arkeolojik alanlara farklı bir bakış açısı kazandırabileceğimiz bir alan yaratmaktı. Yerel yönetim olan Bornova Belediyesi ve İzmir Büyükşehir Belediyesi ile kurduğumuz ilişkiler sonucunda 2009 yılında burada ortak projelere başladık. Kazı alanlarının yanında Bornova Belediyesi'ne ait bir arsayı Yeşilova Höyüğü kazı çalışmalarına yönelik olarak kullanılması yönündeki çabamızın ardından Bornova Belediyesi ile İsveç Kalmar Belediyesi'nin ve müzesinin işbirliğiyle bir Avrupa projesini gerçekleştirdik. Eğitim çalışmalarını inceledik özellikle de İsveç'te. Bu kapsamda 2009 yılında Kalmar Müzesi ile başlatılan Time Travel ya da zaman yolculuğu olarak adlandırılan ilk aktif eğitim çalışmalarına başlandı. Önce arazide, sonra basit yapılmış kulübelerde ve sonra da bir köy içinde aktivitelere benzer şekilde devam ettik. Bu basit olarak ilk çevre içine fazla bir bina yaratmadan ya da basit yapılar ile gerçekleştirdiğimiz aktivitelerin ilk çalışmalarını yine büyük zorluklar içinde yürüttük. Çünkü kazı alanlarının hemen yakınındaki moloz yığını üzerindeki toprak tabakası üzerine kurduğumuz köy, en son aşamada kurduğumuz köyde dahil olmak üzere hep uyuşturucular tarafından yakıldı. 3 kez yanmasına karşın her seferinde buraları ekibimizle onararak çalışmalarımızı sürdürüp kötü bir çevrenin kaderini değiştirme yolunda mücadele eden, özellikle kent içindeki bu mücadeleden vazgeçmedik. Kazılara devam ederken çocuk eğitim faaliyetleri ile birlikte çevre ve insan konusu öncelikli hedefimizi oluşturdu. Bunun için önce çevreyi düzeltelim dedik ve çevrede Yeşilova Höyüğü parkları yaptırdık. Amaç burada da insanların yaşayabileceği sosyal bir alan haline getirebilmekti. Belediye ile gerçekleştirilen bu projeler içinde özellikle ulaşımı kolaylaştırmak için köprüler de inşa ettirdik. Bu projelerin dışında yaptırdığımız bir başka bir şey de durak isimlerini de değiştirmek. Yani insanların algılamalarını hızlandıracak, çevreyle birlikte hızlı bir şekilde bu değişime ayak uydurabilecekleri çok geniş bir alanın çok daha dışındaki alandan bütün bu çalışmalara başladık. Bu proje ile Yeşilova Höyü'yü aynı zamanda ulaşımı kolaylaştıran, iki köprüyle çok kolay ulaşılabilecek, yaşanabilir bir çevre içinde insanların spor yapabileceği bir parkla birlikte aslında bir çevre düzenlemesiyle birlikte yavaş yavaş şekillenmeye, ortaya çıkmaya başladı. Böylece mahallede yaşanabilir bir çevre yaratmaya çalışarak Yeşilova'nın toplum üzerindeki algısını birazcık etkilemek istedik. Bu tabii günümüzde aslında en etkili topluluklardan biri olan sivil toplum örgütleriyle yoğun ilişki içine girip dernekler kurduk. Yeşilova Höyü kazı çalışmaları ve bu çalışmalar süresi içinde aynı zamanda hızlı bir şekilde koruma amaçlı imar planlarını tamamladık. Ve Yeşilova Höyü'ne komşu arkeolojik kazı alanının hemen yanında belediyeye ait bir parseli de bu amaçla öncelikle dizayn etmek, koruma amaçlı imar planı üzerine yerleştirmek istedik. Burada amacımız arkeolojik kültür katmanları hakkında ziyaretçileri de bilgilendirebilecek aktif bir ziyaretçi merkezi inşa etme fikriydi. Bu alanda yaptığımız bu proje aslında daha sonra bir yarışma projesine dönüştürüldü. Yarışma projesindeki amacımız herhangi bir bina yaptırmak değildi Yeşilova Höyü'ne. Tam tersi Yeşilova Höyü'ne özgü aktif faaliyetler sürdürülebilecek özel bir yapı tasarlamaktı. Yani genellikle bizde yapıldığının tersine binayı yapıp içine bir müze oluşturmak gibi bir niyetimiz olmadı. Senaryomuza uygun olarak Bornova Belediyesi'nin 2010 yılında bir mimari yarışma projesi düzenledi. Birinci olan projeyi de kazı alanlarına inşa etme kararı aldı ve 2014 yılında da bu yapılar bitirilerek bize teslim edildi. Hikayesini kısaca özetlemeye çalıştığım bu merkez, yani Yeşilova Höyü Ziyaretçi Merkezi aslında tüm yıl boyunca açık kalan, hemen arkeolojik alanların yanında yer alan, içinde birçok farklı unsuru barındıran bir mekanlar topluluğu. Çocukların yetişkin ve yetişkenlere yönelik çeşitli aktivitelerin düzenlendiği, sergilerin açıldığı bir merkez, çeşitli törenlerin de yapıldığı bir merkez. Merkez, ziyaretçilerin Yeşilova Höyü'nde ele geçen eserlerin benzerlerini ve orijinallerini görebileceği uzun ve yüksek sergi binası, yani müzeden, kazı alanlarını ve doğayı izleyebilecekleri büyük bir terastan, kazı alanlarına bakan kafeterya, çocukların kazı yaptıkları arkeoloji parkı, kazıda çıkan eserleri ve restorasyon çalışmalarını izleyebilecekleri, görece biraz kısa ve alçak konumdaki kazı evinden ve bütün bu süreci yaşayarak öğrenebilecekleri Neolitik köyden oluşmaktaydı. Ve bunların hepsinin de içinde olduğu bir 10 dönümlük kadar bir bahçeye sahip. Yeşilova Höyü Ziyaretçi Merkezi markalaşmak konusunda da adımlar atmaya karar verdik. Bunun için özel bir grupla çalıştık. İstanbul Modern'i markalaştıran İyi Şeyler grubuyla çalıştık. Logosundan yazılımına kadar da birçok unsur bunlar sayesinde düzenlenmiştir. İş düzenlemesi de Erimtan, Sabancı, Makine Kimya Enstitüsü gibi birçok müzeyi yapan hocamız ODTÜ'den Profesör Aysen Savaş çalıştı. Bütün bu çalışmalar öğrencilerin kentliğe özgü gelenek, görenek, sanat, mutfak kültürü, üretim, giyiniş, davranış biçimleri gibi yerel, yöresel kimlik ögelerinde eğlenceli biçimde sunan, sevdiren, katılımcı bir yaklaşım içinde öğrenmelerine fırsat veren bir hedefi amaçlamaktadır. Bornova Belediyesi Yeşilova Höyü Ziyaretçi Merkezi'nde zaman, sayı ve yaş grupları dikkate alınarak 5 farklı ziyaret programı gerçekleştirilmekte. Haftanın 6 günü randevu ile gelinebilmekte. Gruplar tek tek ya da tek ziyaretçiler gelen her ziyaretçi sadece bir atık pil karşılığında buraya girebilmekte. Her ziyaretçi ve ya da ziyaretçi grubu bir uzman arkeolog, burada çalışan uzman arkeologlar tarafından karşılanmakta ve onlar sayesinde 20-30 ile 90 dakika arasında süren bir süreç içinde gezdirilmekte, anlatılmakta. Burada yaş profiline göre farklı anlatımlar, farklı tarzlar benimsenmiş ama hiçbir yerinde engel oluşturacak bir unsur barındırmamış. Ve o yüzden de bütün engelliler her aşamasına, kazı alanlarına kadar ziyaret edebilecek bir düzeneye sahip. Bütün bunlar dışında aslında ziyaretçi merkezi bir duvar ile karşılanmakta. Bu duvarda yazan çok basit bir yazı, uzun hepsi okumayacağım ama bundan 8500 yıl önce insanoğlu bu topraklara yerleştiğinde çevrenizde gördüklerinizden hiçbiri yoktu. Ne arkanızdaki şehir, ne otoyol, ne önünüzdeki bu duvar. Saf haliyle doğa vardı sadece, verimli topraklar, akan dereler ve masmavi gökyüzüyle devam eden bir yazıyla bir ölçüde 8500 yıllık geçmişi yere ve duvara yazılı olduğu, aynı zamanda mekan-zaman ilişkisini sağlamaya çalıştığımız bir yazıyla karşılanmakta. Bu aşamadan sonra ziyaretçiler içindeki yolculuklarına devam etmekte. Duvarlara ve yollara yansıyan buranın hikayesini, 8500 yıllık hikayesini kelimeler bazında öğretilerek hem aynı zamanda mekan içinde yol almakta hem de bilgi açısından da yavaş yavaş donatılmakta. Bu aşamadan sonra içindeki bütün bu yazılardan sonra sergilenen alanına geçerek buradaki eserler üzerindeki detaylı anlatımı ve aynı zamanda kültürü öğrenmeleri sağlanmakta. Hikayesiyle birlikte aynı zamanda dinledikleri geniş sürecin yaşam kalıntılarında görme imkanı bütün bu alanlarda mümkün olabilmekte. Bunu yaparken aynı zamanda teras katına çıkarak buradaki terastan bütün bu sürecin, yani 8000 yıllık sürecin geliştiği bu toprakları ve aynı zamanda diğer yerleşim alanlarında yüksekten görme imkanları bulabilmekte. Kazı alanlarıyla aynı seviyeye inerek hem kazıyı, yani devam eden kazıyı, çünkü 12 ay süresince İzmir Büyükşehir Belediyesi'nin verdiği destekle biz kazılarımızı sürdürüyoruz. Hem kazıyı hem de aynı zamanda buradaki kalıntıları görme imkanı bulabilmekte. Ve ardından kazı evine, yani bu modern bir dizayn edilmiş kazı evine geçerek kazı evinin dışından hem kazı evi avlusundaki kalıntıları, atılmış kalıntıları, bir çöpe atılan tarihimiz diye sergilediğimiz, kültürümüz diye, hem de kazı evinin içindeki diğer bütün bulguları, orijinal buluntuları dışarıdan görebilmekte. Yani arkeolojinin mutfağını ve burada yapılan çalışmaları izleme imkanı, görme imkanı ve aynı zamanda orijinal buluntuları görme imkanı bulabilmekte. Daha küçük yaşta olan çocuklar da arkeoloji parkına alınmakta. Burada da yine abileri ya da büyükleri gibi aynı alan içinde, yakınında onlar için dizayn edilmiş kazı alanında arkeolojik kazı çalışmaları gerçekleştirmekte. Böylece toprağa dokunarak kültürün ve aynı zamanda o yaşamın niteliğini ve gücünü neden koruması gerektiğini de algılatmaya yönelik bir çalışma burada sürdürülmekte. Ardından çocuklar ziyaretin son aşamasında çocuklar üzerine bir deri giysi giyerek orijinal kalıntıları gördükleri, buluntularını izledikleri sürecin yaşandığı köye geçiş sağlanmakta. Burada temel şeyimiz özellikle çocukların ya da büyüklerin de aynı şekilde yaşayarak bu süreci anlamalarını, öğrenmelerini sağlamak. Bunun için de sadece bu köye girerken bir avuç buğday veriyorlar. Amaç takası öğretmek bunda da. Hem de aslında ne yazık ki çocuklarımız artık buğdayın bile ne olduğunu bilmiyorlar. İlk kez eline aldıkları bu nesnenin ne olduğunu anlamaya çalışmaları bile bizim için önemli bir mutluluk kaynağı. Daha sonra içinde büyük bir binaya geçerek orada da bu geçişi sağladıkları, dönemi ve süreci öğrendikleri, dışarıya çıktıklarında aslında nasıl bir yaşam kendilerini bekledikleri sürecin sağlandığı zaman evi dediğimiz eve, oradan da köyün içine dağılarak uzmanların eşliğinde bu köyün içinde çeşitli aktivitelere ya da yaşama katılmakta. Yaşamın içinde duvarları sıvamaktan tutun, içinde çeşitli dokumacılığa, pişmiş toprak eserlerin yapımına, aynı zamanda buğdayları öğüttükleri öğütme taşlarını kullanarak un yapmaya kadar birçok farklı faaliyeti, yani yaşamı kendileri işin içine girerek öğrenmeye çalışmakta. Hatta yemek ve ekmek pişirerek o döneme özgü bazı bulgularında bizzat kendi ellerine şekillenmesini sağlamakta. Av yapmakta, genellikle bir sapanla bir domuzu avlayarak yapma bir domuzu. Avın da aynı zamanda ne olduğunu görebilmekte. Taş aletleri, özellikle birçok farklı türdeki taş aletleri dokunarak ve yaparak bunları öğrenmeye çalışmakta. Hatta bunları oradaki otlarla, ektiğimiz otlarla biçerek bunu kullanmayı da öğrenmekte. Böylece köyün içinde hem dokundukları hem yaptıkları hem de aynı zamanda yedikleri, hazırladıklarını yedikleri bir süreci içine işi iyice bir köylü, neolitik bir köylü gibi girerek bu yaşamı öğrenmek ve yaşamak için de bütün bu sürece dahil olmakta. Tabii bütün bu süreç yaklaşık olarak 60 ile 90 dakika kadar süren ziyaret programı sonunda ziyaretçilerin önce bir kentli, sonra da bir İzmirli gibi büyüyebilmeleri ve yaşadıkları kente yönelik aidiyet duygularını geliştirebilmeleri hedeflenmiştir. Yeşilova Höyü'ndeki kültürel çalışmaları iki ayrı üniversite, Yaşar ve Ege Üniversitesi turizm bölümleri tarafından SWOT analizleri de yapılmış. Bunların sonuçlarına göre de olumlu olumsuz yönleri dikkate alınarak çalışmalara yön verilmiştir. Proje ile bireyin kendi yerel tarihini öğrenmesini sağlayarak geçmişi çok eskiye giden bir kimlik duygusunu yaratma hedeflenmiştir. Bu alanda arkeolojik bilimiyle toplum buluşturulmuş. Böylece öğrenciler tarihi değerlerimizi anlayarak onlara daha iyi sahiplenmeleri sağlanmış. Merkez tarihi toplum için yaşayan bir kavram haline getirerek şehirdeki vatandaşlar arasında tarihi alanlara karşı sevgiyi geliştirmiş. Ziyaretçi merkezinde bunların dışında aktif sergileme formatıyla turistik avantajlar sağlayarak birçok farklı aktiviteler de yine yapılmakta. Örneğin sergiler, animasyon atölyeleri, mimarlık ve arkeoloji konularında çeşitli sergiler, sempozyumlar, çalıştaylar düzenlenmekte. Bu anlamda burası bir ölçüde kültür ve sanat merkezi olarak da çalışmayı sürdürmekte. Aktif sergileme formatıyla birçok sergiye de ev sahipliği yapan, aynı zamanda birçok çalıştay ve konferansları da beraberinde getiren bu alanda toplumla daha iyi buluşabilmek için büyüklere yönelik olarak da birçok farklı faaliyetler, yoga gibi birçok farklı faaliyetler de yerine getirilmiş. Ziyaretçi merkezi aktif sergileme formatıyla turistik avantajlar sağlamaya başlamış. Kentin ilk yerleşim alanı Yeşilova Höyü kazısıyla turistleri de bu bölgeyi çekmektedir. Proje bu şekliyle İzmir'e ekonomik katkı sağlamaya ve Bornova'yı da bir çekim merkezine dönüştürmektedir. 2014 yılında ilk açıldığında yaklaşık 5000 kişiyle başlayan ziyaretçi sayısı randevu gibi bir takım kısıtlamalara yine bağlı kalarak bugün 25.000 civarına ulaşmış. Bu ziyaretçi merkezinde ekibin özellikle özverili çalışmalarıyla bugüne kadar 80.000'den fazla öğrenci bu eğitim programına katılmıştır. Yeşilova Höyü Ziyaretçi Merkezi çevreye önem vererek onunla bütünleşerek arkeolojik alanlardaki kültürel mirası anlamak için eğitim işlevini kazandırmayı ve yaşayan bir kurum halinde gelmeyi hedeflemektedir. Yeşilova Höyü Ziyaretçi Merkezi henüz inşaat aşamasından itibaren ulusal ve uluslararası anlamda birçok ödül kazanmış. Geçmişi modern bir yapı ile birleştiren Yeşilova Höyü Ziyaretçi Merkezi, kültür ve turizme katkıda bulunmasının yanı sıra yerel yönetimleri de harekete geçirerek onların da güçlü katkısıyla toplum için yaşanabilir bir çevre oluşmasında etkili olmuştur. Üniversiteden ilk öğretime, tarih öğretimi ve kültürel mirasımızı sahiplenmesi açısından topluma yeni bir pencere açmıştır. Teşekkür ederim.
Thank you very much. for sharing with us your very insightful and very inspiring project. Thank you.
Okay, I will keep my final remarks brief, and if we have any final questions, I'll ask that. I will respond to Felix, though. And I will say that, diplomatically speaking, there were many foreign excavations invited to participate, so we could break it up. And you all were perhaps the most gracious in accepting our invitation. So I do thank you for that. And it was something we discussed greatly on whether to put you all as a group or to break you up. So in the end, Germany got a whole afternoon. And you are just up the street, so we consider you a neighbor. Okay, so I will end with a few remarks in the final hour, and I hope we can take a step back and consider the range of topics that we've had the opportunity to hear over the last 2 days. In deciding to pursue this symposium, I have to give great thanks to my collaborator, Nilgün. It was her time here as an ANAMED Fellow where she really decided to pursue this, and we did a half-day session last year for those of you who were able to join us in October. And there was tremendous interest in that. And from there, we decided to pursue what we did the last 2 days. And again, we've seen tremendous turnout and commitment to archaeology. So thank you for being our inspiration for that. On the one hand, I see this momentum as increasingly exciting, but a lot of people have pointed out the dangers that we face with heritage becoming an economic commodity and increasingly capitalistic. But I'd like to return to our opening remarks. And we were reminded that we can't move forward with inscription on a list or with public archaeology or with outreach until we have the basic foundation, which is good, solid research. And for all of us here, we are primarily archaeologists first. Field work is incredibly important to all of us. We value it. That has a public component now, that we're realizing the agency and reaching out to the people that work with us as, quote, staff rather than workmen, that they are involved in the decision making, that they increasingly become involved in the research design, I think could be a new way of moving forward with things. Also thinking about what we consider as placemaking. We heard a lot about sites, but we also zoomed out and thought about the wider context of the landscape, what that means. And the landscape has become equally important in the voice that we are all participating in. People showed really, I'm pausing, breathtakingly dangerous photographs of not just rivers that need to be reclaimed, not just pollution, but the erasure of the cultural heritage landscape from large-scale infrastructure projects, and that we all are increasingly aware that that is perhaps not our responsibility, but it is, as an academic line of inquiry, something that we need to be increasingly focused on. So that has been, for me, the wake-up call here, but also the good news is that we have, even at the final hour, we have a room full of people. So I think that's tremendously positive. With that, I'd also like to thank all of our participants for coming, everybody for your presentations, for your thoughtful commitment to thinking about the topic, to skating between different lenses of research, to public outreach. And I also would like to thank the students in the room from Coach for helping with the setup, for the translation work, for everything that you've done. Our partners from UNESCO, it was incredibly exciting to have the opportunity to work with you. And then a final huge round of applause, if I can, for Naz and all the work that she's done. Thank you very much.